Hey everybody, March is Women History Month and I wanted to share a story with you today. She was 11 years old when her parents put her on a train and sent her to another country. She never returned. After World War I, food was in short supply. And so a malnourished, quiet little girl named Miep, that was her nickname, left her family and her hometown of Vienna, Austria, and never came back. It was December 1920 when her parents decided to take advantage of a relief project for Austrian children. And in order to keep her from starving, Miep's parents put her on a train to the Netherlands to live with a family they'd never met before. So the Nieuwenbergs, a working class family who already had 5 children of their own, took Miep in as their foster daughter. And thankfully, their love and adoration grew for her and hers for them. And 2 years later, she moved with them to Amsterdam. When she was 18, she started working as a typist in a embroidery shop, and she'd been with that foster family for 7 years at that point. They truly had become her family. 6 years later, she lost that job and had a neighbor who mentioned another opportunity to her. There was a newly established Dutch branch of a German spice company called Opekta, and Miep went to work for them as a representative. As soon as she had mastered, it was a jam-making business, and as soon as she mastered the jam-making part of it, they ended up putting her in customer service. She was about 24 years old at this point when she began to work for them, and that particular branch was managed by Otto Frank, a Jewish businessman who had recently relocated from Germany. Now, at the same time this is happening, and probably the very reason Otto left Germany, the dictator Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party has taken over Germany, and they are beginning now to ban Jewish people from holding professional jobs. Most of the Jewish businesses that were being destroyed. You already know the rest of that story and how that got worse and worse and worse. The dots you probably haven't connected yet is that Otto Frank has a daughter named Anne. Back to Miep's story. After refusing to join a Nazi women's association in Amsterdam, Miep's passport was invalidated and she was ordered to be deported back to Austria. She hadn't lived in Austria for 13 years. As quickly as she could, she married her fiancé to obtain Dutch citizenship and to evade deportation. Because she was fluent in both Dutch and German, she helped the Frank family establish themselves in Dutch society, which was awesome. She and her husband became regular guests in the Franks' home. They began to just develop great relationship. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, sparking World War II. Now remember, she left her homeland after World War I. Now she's at the beginning of World War II. As you know, other invasions happened, including the Netherlands in 1940. And Jewish men and women and children throughout the continent were now being sent to concentration camps. At this point, Miep has been working for Otto and developing a relationship with his family for 7 years. Knowing his family's in danger, Otto Frank asks Miep to help hide them. She became one of several people, if you know the story, that hid the family in the secret apartment above their workspace. And she faced prison or worse, much worse, as she illegally hid them and also illegally bought meat and vegetables for them. She was constantly sneaking food to the family. She kept bringing in more Jewish people, including the Frank's business partner, the family of the business partner, her own dentist. She and her husband had a Jewish student that lived in their home they were hiding. Every day she saw trucks loaded with Jews headed to railway stations en route to Nazi concentration camps. She did not tell a soul. She did not tell her foster parents, no one, that she was hiding Jews. When she purchased food, she had to be creative about it. She had to avoid suspicion. So she would visit several different suppliers in a day. She would never take more than a bag full of groceries out of that store. She would oftentimes hide things in her coat. She would never take any of the supplies upstairs during working hours because she didn't want any OPECTA workers to discover what was going on. She lived in this constant state of being discovered because what she was doing was punishable by death. And yet she continued day in and day out. On the morning of August 4th, 1944, 2 years after the Frank family went into hiding, Miep was sitting at her desk when she was confronted by a man with a gun. And he was commanding her, "Stay put, don't move." The families had been betrayed and the hiding place had been discovered. All of the Jews that Miep was protecting got arrested. It seemed it was all over, but Miep was this relentless character. The next day, she went to the German police station to try to find the arrestees and to offer money. She was actually trying to exchange money for freedom. She was bribing someone. Of course, it was unsuccessful. Surprisingly, she did not get arrested, and only because the interrogating officer, she recognized his accent. The officer that was interrogating her, he was from Vienna. They were both born in Vienna. And they bonded over that, and he was excited about the fact that she was from Vienna. And he kind of lost himself in that moment. And then he began to pace and curse and pace and curse and pace and curse, and finally he decided to let her go. Before the police officers returned to the hiding place, Miep ran up there knowing that Anne kept a journal. And she found all of Anne's journals and she hid them in her desk. Now, you recognize in her story this amazing theme of courage, daily courage, the theme of resourcefulness, the theme of relentlessness. You see all of that. And the truth is, if we had her here today to talk to her, if you've watched any of her interviews, she would just say she's just doing the normal thing. She was just buying meat. You are likely just like her. You are likely operating out of a courageous, resourceful, relentless place on a day-to-day basis and not seeing it. I want you to notice something about her childhood. Her childhood shaped her. She would never have turned her back on anyone who needed protection and care, like the protection and care she was given by her family, her foster family. Well, you know the story, only Otto survived the Holocaust. When he returned, he got a letter with news of the death of his daughters in concentration camps. Miep was sitting at her desk watching him read the letter. As all of the color drained out of his face, he handed her the letter. She read that the girls had died in concentration camps. She stood from her desk, opened that bottom drawer, pulled out the 5 journals that she had gotten that Anne had written in, and she handed them to Otto, and she said, "This is the legacy of your daughter." Now, Miep is an incredible, history-changing woman. She required bravery, courage, resourcefulness, but the thing I find most remarkable about her story is this intention with which she preserved the legacy of someone else's daughter. How do we do that? How do we preserve the legacy of someone else? I think that's just the way she did. We provide that space for the story to be told. We keep that story alive. We pass it along with hope and encouragement and inspiration and even a little challenge. So I tell you this story basically to say, whose legacy do you need to keep alive? What brave action will that require? How resourceful will you have to be? In the month of March, because it's Women's History Month, we will preserve space purposely for the legacy of someone else's daughter and tell some stories here about women in our history that have been change makers. I'm Michele Gooch with Life by Design. Join me next Wednesday at 1. I'll see you then.